Welcome, everyone. We are honored to have our Rosh Bet Midrash, Rabbi Dweck, with us this evening or afternoon, depending on your location. We'll be doing a question and answer session for us. As always, please do check out thehabara.com. And if you have not yet had a chance to purchase our book on Shavuot, you can do so from Dart Press. Without further ado, I hand over to Rabbi Dweck for this evening's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. And hello to everybody who is on live and to who will be listening to the recording. So we've got our questions in, and I will do my best to answer the questions. I don't know if it'll take a full hour or not, but we shall see. Some of the questions, again, not all very clear. Some of them, but I'll do my best to do them. And in no particular order, here we go. So the first question. I find it hard to keep concentration throughout the Amidah, especially since I'm reading the same words 3 times a day. How can I be more mindful or make the tefillah not seem repetitive? Those are two different questions. How can I be more mindful is one question. How can I make the tefillah not seem repetitive is a different question. Look, I will say, first of all, that the point of tefillah is to speak to God. So it is important for a person to recognize in tefillah that you're speaking to God. That should subsume anything that you're saying. So if you have an awareness that you're standing before the Shekhinah and that you're speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is why we speak it quietly, we speak it personally, it's intimate, it's in first person, that should subsume a person's tefillah. Now, I recognize the fact that for the majority of people, that's simply not the case. The Ramchal writes very beautifully in the Mesillat Yesharim. He says, you should be noseh v'noten with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You should engage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as if you're engaging with another person. Literally as though you're talking to a conscious, engaging entity before you, right? I mean, obviously with the appropriate respect and reverence with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that's how you speak. So if you read the tefillah not as a conversation, not as a genuine dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but as a recitation, which is the way that the majority of people do read it, then of course it's going to be repetitive and mindless, because that's what it is. It's repetitive and mindless. But if you're speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it doesn't matter if you're saying the same words every day. All of those words are profoundly important. And today is not yesterday, and it's not tomorrow. It's right now. It's today. It's this particular audience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if you are able to bring yourself to that space, which may come as a result of maturity and time, and I have no idea, how old the person is who's asking this question. This is completely anonymous. I don't know anybody almost who's asked questions. So, forgive me for it. Don't think that I know you and then therefore all I have is the question and the words, which is probably better so that I can answer it, as objectively as I can. But um, if you're speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu directly, and this is the way that you have consciousness of what you're doing with tefillah, it doesn't matter that you're saying the same words every day. Today, it's important to say these things. It's important to talk about the praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that you have, which is beautifully tailored by the Hachamim. It's important to talk about the fact that you feel that you need more wisdom, that you asking to help in Teshuvah, that you need healing and health and so on and so forth. I mean, why should those things get old? They never get old. So that's what I would say. And aside from that, practice mindfulness. Practice mindfulness. There are many, everybody's into mindfulness nowadays, but, there's wonderful tools out there. Practice mindfulness. Different words will not help you. Consciousness will help you. Maturity. So I was going to say, when I went to, I said, I don't know who the question is coming from. It may come with time and maturity and learning and understanding more and more about your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to you in your life. But that is all I can say. Tefillah is a mature thing. It's not meant for immature people. So, yes, if you're going to do it that way, then, you do it, you go through the motions and you recognize that you're going through the motions. And that in and of itself is important, so that you don't completely lose your connection to tefillah. Right? So I've given many classes on prayer. I suggest, very strongly suggest that you listen to them and, to be able to orient yourself if you haven't already listened to them. And you'll learn from there, and you'll recognize from there that tefillah is a mature aspect of humanity, as relationship is a mature aspect of humanity. And the older one gets and the more mature one gets, has nothing to do with age, by the way. I mean, slightly has to do with age, but a person can be old in age, 50, 60, 70 years old, and be very immature. So it has to do with that level of consciousness. And I will leave it at that. Question number 2. Why does it talk about the location of gold, excuse me, in the story of creation? It seems like an insignificant detail amidst the grand story of all of creation. Well, I found this question a bit amusing because, is that the only seeming insignificant detail that you found in the story of creation? I mean, in my mind, there are several insignificant details seemingly in the story. I think there's insignificant, what seem like insignificant details in the Torah in general. But what I will say about the Genesis story in general is that it isn't to be taken at face value. The whole of the Genesis story, according to the Hachamim and the Talmud, and certainly the Rishonim, is that it's filled with what we would call the Sodot Torah, or what Harambam would refer to as the Sodot Torah. But he's not the only one. I mean, the Rishonim across the board, whether it's Nachmanides or Maimonides, and pretty much everyone in between, recognize that Bereshit is encrypted. So when you recognize that, no detail is necessarily insignificant, and it asks to be understood and studied deeply. I mean, when I was living in Brooklyn, I did a series on studying through Bereshit, and we genuinely took a year to go through one pasuk a week of Bereshit, and that didn't seem even enough. So, and I mean, one could say that about the whole Torah, but I'm saying it specifically with regards to Bereshit because it is that kind of presentation. It is not to be taken at face value. The story of Genesis is not a story. It's a fairy tale of sorts. I mean, you have things that go on in that story that you don't have at any other level of reality, but it is not to be taken at face value. So I leave you with that, and that should be able to answer that question for you. Question number 3, when people tell me if I keep Shabbat or do this, that certain things will happen. Again, it's very vague. Which people are telling you what is do this? Certain things, I don't know. It's quite vague. Or you'll see or as they say, or certain things will happen, or I'll see success in business. Is this the same as what the Torah tells us during the Berachot and Kelalot, that if we keep the mitzvot, we'll have rain and peace and so on? Or is it not the same? I would venture to say it's not the same, because the Torah says it. And if the Torah says it, then the Torah says it. If the Torah doesn't say it, then it doesn't say it. And that's it, right? So I don't know, people tell me, what does that mean? Which people? Why are they telling you this? What is the source for them saying this to you? The first thing that I would say to you is to ask them for a source and to understand what the nature of this is. Why is it this way? That they're suggesting that this is the thing that's going to give you, success in business, or certain things will happen, as you say. The Torah is very explicit with regards to the nature of sechar in it, and what it says is, aside from a few mitzvot that have specific sechar, mentioned about them, like kabel davicha veitemecha nemani arichun yamecha, honor your mother and father, or your father and mother, in order to lengthen your days, and even that is a dirasha, right? Even that the hachamim are doresh, which days, where, how, the majority of the mitzvot don't have direct sechar connected to them. Hakadosh Baruch Hu simply says in Torah, "Do my mitzvot, and things will be good for you," and they'll be good for you. Why? And I think this is an important point, because I'm not suggesting, but from the question, and certainly from the general populace, there is this kind of interest in doing mitzvot for ulterior motive. Why would it matter to you whether you're going to be successful in business if you keep Shabbat? I mean, that's the real question. Why should you not just keep Shabbat because the Torah says to keep Shabbat? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks it of you. recognize that in the question itself is a declaration of sorts of ulterior motive, that you will be open. And I'm not saying you will do this. I'm simply basing it on the frame of the question, or the language of the question. The language of the question implies that you would be more open to doing Shabbat if you knew that it would help you in business. And that's a terrible premise. It is a very inferior way to do mitzvot. And Harambam writes very clearly at the beginning of Hilchot Teshuvah, at the beginning of Perek Yod, the 10th chapter of Hilchot Teshuvah, that a person should never say they're doing mitzvot for any of those kinds of things. And appropriately, it's just not right to do mitzvot because of that. So again, I don't know who the people are or what they're telling you. The Torah clearly talks about the rewards in the Torah itself, and that's what you should go by. And you should do mitzvot because they are mitzvot, and for no other reason, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to do them. And either you recognize the frame of Torah and the endeavor of Torah or not. You know, it shouldn't be something about picking and choosing things that you find to be significant or meaningful to you personally. Yeah, that's the reality, in my humble opinion. Question number 4. There are quite a few ethnic Ashkenazim in my community. I imagine you mean Ashkenazim. I don't know what ethnic Ashkenazim means, right? That they're Ashkenazim, that they descend from people from that region, who are now following a Sephardi approach. And the Chabura definitely played a key role in that happening. I'm very sorry to those Ashkenazim. But nonetheless, however, they are for some reason treated or looked at differently than ethnic Sfaradim who follow an Ashkenazi approach, which seems to be much more accepted. Why do you think it's treated differently? So I guess my question to you would be, who looks at them differently or treats them differently? Is it Ashkenazim? Is it Sfaradim? Is it everybody? Who is it? It's hard for me to answer the question because I don't know, about the particular scenario that we're talking about. If I were to venture, some kind of frame for it, I would say that, it's important to recognize that for at least the past 100 years, over the time that Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews have converged in the United States of America, in Eretz Israel, and so on, the Ashkenazi approach to Judaism has been predominant, has been the dominant approach. And therefore, it's expected and assumed that the minority would adhere to the majority. So it's looked at, and it's so much of contemporary normative Judaism is framed in Ashkenazi light, right? Ashkenazic light. And so it is very much acceptable that anybody should essentially, act like Ashkenazim. So it's why, for example, you'll have many of the Sfaradi Hachamim over the last, 70, 80 years dressing like Ashkenazim, right? Black hat, black coat kind of thing, which, certainly is not a Sfaradi kind of dress, traditional anyway, not a traditional Sfaradi kind of dress. But again, I don't know why we should be dressing in traditional dress at all. At some point, that dress was the contemporary dress of Goyim, right? So, why should that be the thing that ultimately, we decide to use? Why should we not just dress like, in a polo and khakis and, like regular people on the planet, in those situations? I really don't know. And if you were to ask me, that's what I would say, people should dress. They should dress in contemporary clothing, because I don't understand this thing about, preserving a particular, generation of ethnic clothing that is not uniquely Jewish, right? Jews did not invent the Hamburg. Jews did not invent the frock coat. So, nor did they invent the color black. So I think that, I don't understand that. But in any case, that may be what it is that you're referring to. And so when the Sfaradi approach, which is a minority approach, which is a less understood approach because it's a minority approach, is there, and you find people from the majority moving into the minority, it's a little awkward. So perhaps that's why. Okay, moving right along here, number 5. Is there a point in learning my whole life if I don't necessarily plan on becoming a rabbi to teach classes? If I don't share my knowledge, what good is it? Well, first thing I would say is there's an assumption in this question, right? The assumption in this question is that we learn in order to teach, and that's a failure. That's a failed assumption. That is not an accurate assumption. We do not learn in order to teach. Primarily, we need to learn in order to teach. In other words, if I'm going to teach, obviously I need to learn, and there is an obligation to teach, which I'll get into in a moment, but the primary reason for learning is for you. You need to study Torah in order to be able to know how to live your life, because the Torah is the guide for your life as a Jew in covenant with God. The Torah is the frame and the instruction for how to, literally, that's why Torah is called Torah. It's the teaching, right? It teaches you how to live your life. So you can't really live your life without studying Torah appropriately. In other words, what do I mean by that? You cannot, as a covenant faithful Jew, right, a Jew faithful to the Berit that HaKadosh Baruch has with Am Yisrael, cannot live that life robustly and fully without studying the Torah. You need to study Torah in order to be able to know it. It's a practical thing. And there is a mitzvah, there's a mitzvah to study Torah for you. So, I mean, aside from that, Harambam writes in Hilchot Talmud Torah Perek Aleph, Halachayot, Ade matai hayav lilmod Torah. How long does a person need to study Torah for in their life? Ad yom moto, till the day they die. Shnei Amar, as it says in the Pasukim, Upen yasuru milvabecha kol yemei hayecha. So here Harambam gives a reason. He says they should never leave your heart all the days of your life. And he says, as long as you're not actively learning, guess what you're doing? You're forgetting. And that's just simply, unfortunately, the nature of the human mind. So you learn for you, in order for you to know how to live your life, in order for you to have conscious awareness of the frame of the world, the meaning of the world, the active nature of living your life in the world. And as long as and if you don't actively engage in learning, you forget. And that's it. As far as the teaching is concerned, we talk about teaching. There is no mitzvah in the Torah to teach people. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to teach your children. That is the only mitzvah that has to do with teaching in the Torah. The Hachamim extend that specifically to Talmidim, right? So they say, Talmidecha elu banecha. Your Talmidim, your formal students, are your children, and therefore you have to teach them in the same way that you have to teach your children, almost in the same way you have to teach your children, and that is the mitzvah of Torah. But you are not obligated, nobody's obligated to teach anybody who's not a Talmid. I mean, it's not prohibited to teach somebody who's not your Talmid. I mean, it's a nice chesed, but it's not an obligation. There's no obligation of a Hakam to teach anything, except to his children or to his Talmidim. If they wish to teach broader than that, then that's their prerogative, and it's a chesed, and I'm sure that it's a quote unquote mitzvah to do, meaning not in the strict sense of mitzvah like the 630 mitzvot. It's a good thing to do, right? It's recognized as worthy of sechar of some sort. But the primary reason to learn is not to teach; it's to do and to be conscious and aware of the nature of your life in the world within the framework of the Brit. So the short answer is yes, you should learn till the day you die. Question number 6. How should I approach how should I approach many statements of the Hachamim in the Gemara as to whether or not they're meant to be taken literally? Example, so that's a very good question. The most general answer that I can give is it's based on frame. Again, it's based on the context in which you see it in the Gemara. Majority of the things like this that are said in the Gemara are not literal. Although, in this particular example that you give, there's a question. One of the Hachamim there, I think it was Rabbi Zera, he says, I was somech without tefillah, and I did get into trouble. I did get problems happen to me in my life, So clearly, it's immediately even there saying, well, this cannot be this ironclad blanket statement that runs for everybody. And the Tosafot have to deal with it also over there, because it says, well, what is, there's a story that one of the Hachamim was somech geulal tefillah, lo pasak chucha bifumeh kol hayom, right? He couldn't stop smiling all day because he was so thrilled that he was actually zocher to be somech geulal tefillah. So the Tosafot has, everybody's somech geulal tefillah. You end the beracha, Gal Yisrael, you begin Hashem Sefalei Tiftach. That's Michul Gevilat Tefillah. So Tosafot say, it's only when you do so at the appropriate time, which is you finish Kriyat Shema just before sunset, and you say Hashem Sefalei Tiftach at the Nikudah of sunset, and that's really Michul Gevilat Tefillah. Whatever the case, my point is, notice all of the variables and the details that happen. And what that leaves you with is that the Hachamim are saying something broader. They're saying something about the nature of what it is to be somech geulat tefillah. In this particular case, I mean, I know you're giving it as an example, but that's with all of the things that the Hachamim say. Kol hashoneh halachot b'chol yom v'tach lo shoben olam haba. A person who learns halachot or shoneh halachot, reads through halachot, reviews halachot every day, he's guaranteed to be a ben olam haba, a son of olam haba, whatever it is that means, right? It doesn't say that he's zocheh l'chayei olam haba. It says he's a ben olam haba. Well, it's teaching you something. Why would that be the case? Are you telling me that, regardless of what a person does, as long as they learn halachot every day, they're a ben olam haba? What if they're, constantly speaking lashon hara and they're calling, terrible nicknames to people all the time? Rambam says person loses their chelik olam haba because of that. So again, there's different terms. Yesh lo chelik leolam haba, zocheh l'chayei olam haba, ben olam haba. It's all different terms. So my point to you is these statements are not meant to be these ironclad, face value, parochial statements. Like all of the words of the Hachamim, they are expressed as teachings, and you should learn concepts from them and recognize how it is that they mean these things in terms of their manifestation. And that takes learning. Again, it takes contextual awareness, it takes learning, which is why you need to constantly be learning all the time. Question number 7. When starting to study halakha, lemaaseh, which is practical halakha, should one just study a medieval code, ala Shulchan Aruch and Mishneh Torah, or go, the Shulchan Aruch is not, well, anyway, or go with contemporary practical codes, like Yalkut Yosef and Chacham Toledanu's Mekor HaBeracha, Mekor Hayim? Which halachic standards is one? Oh, then we go into a whole bunch of. This is 17 questions. This is not one question. Which halachic standards is one accountable to? I mean, which standard of halachot should an individual hold by? Those commonly accepted by the community one is a part of, or that which seems most logical to the learned individual? And then the person apologizes if the last questions are too vague. Look, my opinion is, depending on the time that you have, again, this is about being learned. You learn in order to be able to know, in order for you to be able to act. And I believe that if a person studies halakha appropriately, what is appropriately? The best way to study halakha is to study the Talmud. You read, Harambam, read the Bet Yosef and Shulchan Aruch. If you learn halakha that way, then you have a very robust understanding of what it is you're meant to do. Because you can extrapolate anything that is not explicitly stated there, you can extrapolate, and that's essentially what a Pesach is. So if your interest is just like, I just want to know what to do, well then yes, study read Yalkut Yosef. What can I tell you? Read Chacham Ovadia, Hazon Ovadia, whatever. You can rely on him. Right? Rely on whatever Chacham Ovadia says. Right? Good. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Right? But if you want to learn halakha and you want to understand halakha, well then that's not the way to learn. You need to learn the Talmud. You have to read Harambam. You have to study Bet Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch to be able to get a broad knowledge of where the halakha has gone and why people say things other than Harambam says, right? Or maybe other than what the Talmud says. You get a good understanding of that. And then you have an understanding of what to do. Then you read Chacham Ovadia, you get where he's coming from. You can understand what he's done in his halachot and how. And then, at that point, you can say, listen, I recognize Chacham Ovadia's Pesach here. This Pesach, I have substantial reason to question it or to do something different, and that's possible as well, right? You don't have to be greater than Chacham Ovadia to be able to disagree on a point or something if a person has had sufficient scholarship. The Torah did not end with Chacham Ovadia in the same way that it didn't end with the Ben Ish Chai before Chacham, right? And it's not going to end Be'ezrat Hashem for many generations. So it depends what you're asking. If you just want to know, tell me what to do, then yeah, read Chacham Toledano. No problem. He's a substantial posek, very serious Talmid Chacham. Have great respect for him, great respect for his Pesach Din. If that's your goal, choose one and do it. Be consistent. But if you want to learn halakha, which that is not what I just said, right? If it's just that you want to know what to do, that's a different story. If you want to learn halakha, then you have to learn halakha appropriately. And that's the way to learn halakha. Okay. 8. Hello, Rabbi. Hello. Hope everything is well. Thank you. Everything is as well it can be in these crazy, terrible, bothersome times. Recently, I stumbled upon something about Jewish history that got me quite confused. The findings in Eretz Yisrael show a substantial amount of usage of Ktav Ivri, and it seems it was widely used by our people way before the usage of Ktav Ashuri. It doesn't seem, it's absolutely clear that that's what we used. That was the writing, this Ktav Ivri. Ktav Ashuri is a very late development. We didn't use Ktav Ashuri. So the question is, why is it that the current Torah manuscripts are being written with Ktav Ashuri? Because the Hachamim required it. We didn't used to write in these letters. The Hachamim established that we should write in these letters. As a matter of fact, it's very interesting because what you write over here, wouldn't it be controversial, you say, to write the Torah differently from what could possibly be its original alphabet? Yes, it would be controversial. And it was controversial. And it's interesting because if you look at some of the manuscripts where the Ashuri started to be used, the earliest manuscripts of where the Ashuri started to be used, they still wrote the Shem Hashem in the Ktav Ivri. And we have evidence of it. Why? Because Shem Hashem, it was so holy and great that they didn't want to write it in the new font. They wanted to keep it traditionally in the old font. But even that changed, as you know. So there's nothing wrong with this because the Hachamim have the authority to be able to change it. Remember, there's nothing, where in the Torah does it say the Torah has to be written in specific letters? It doesn't say that. Where is any of that specified? None of it is specified. Where is it specified that the Torah has to be written in a specific way, in specific form, specific shape, and so on and so forth? It's not specified. The Hachamim established that, and they established it as a development, I shouldn't say a development, as definitions of, applications of the mitzvah in the Torah to write a Sefer Torah, right? Or writing mezuzot and tefillin and so on and so forth. So it could be that it's deoraita now because the Hachamim define the mitzvah deoraita. And anytime the Hachamim make a derasha on a mitzvah deoraita and establish definitive law on a mitzvah of the Torah, that law that the Hachamim established is deoraita. But they have full authority to do so. Like they have full authority to do it everywhere else with every other mitzvah in the Torah. So that's what happened. Question number 9. How to create a more inclusive space in Orthodoxy for all Jews? Well, that's a very broad question. But I will say this. I think two things. I think first of all, historically, the Sfaradim have always been very good at this. And one of the reasons for that is because the Sfaradim always looked at Am Yisrael as a nation first and a religion second. The Sephardim always recognized that the Brit of Abraham Avinu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu established Abraham Avinu, is not with Abraham and his students, but with Abraham and his children and his family. And that is binding upon us. That is what makes Israel Israel. On that is the Torah and what comes from Torah, right? The law of Torah and the concepts of Torah and so on. And then we recognize there's a standard. So the Sfaradim recognize there's a standard. And the standard was always what we would call now in the modern world Orthodox. But all that means is that we accepted the Talmud as the source text of our law and the frame of our thought. And we wouldn't imagine to use anything else. We wouldn't imagine to use anything else. So that was the standard. Did everybody keep it? Did everybody practice it? No, not everybody did. But everybody recognized that that was the standard. So, and the Sfaradim, because of that, have been able to run for a very long time with faithful members of its broad, forgive me for using the term, its broad church, even if they're not terribly practicing, even if they're not engaged, they are overwhelmingly traditional because they recognize the value of it all, because that value is held amongst the Sfaradim. We don't, value or devalue Chas v'Shalom based on a person's practice per se. Everybody is part of Am Yisrael. And the best thing you could do is try and teach people, bring people closer, recognize the nature of their lives, and make the halakha and the Torah as livable for them as possible, as practical for them as possible. And that's the role of a great Hacham, knows how to do that without compromising the Torah in doing so. So that's how, I think, in all honesty, we could learn from the Sfaradim to make a more inclusive space in orthodoxy for all Jews. The Ashkenazim, frankly, and I say this with respect. I say this with respect. I don't say this as chas v'shalom, as a digger or negative. But the Ashkenazim historically have been poor, very poor at this. And the Sfaradim have been very good at this. It's one of the things. Okay, question number 10. Dear Rabbi Dweck, thank you for the insightful shiur on tefillin. Don't remember which one that was, but thank you. I recently came across Dr. Yehuda Cohn's research suggesting that the origins of tefillin might be linked to ancient protective amulets, as evidenced by findings in Qumran and interpretations of the term totafot as amuletic. In addition, he claims that the practice of tying important verses to oneself was common in Hellenistic culture, tying verses of Homer, for example. Given the Torah's prohibition on amulets and magic, do you think this historical perspective has implications for how we understand and practice Mizvah Tefillin today, especially in light of interpretations like those of the Rambam on such matters, for example, in the Mishneh Torah of Foreign Worship, chapter 11? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I think that, of course, it's the same, similar to how Rambam talks about Korbanot. There was Avodah Zarah, and the Korbanot came as a response to Avodah Zarah. And one could say, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that the tefillin are a response to that kind of practice. But I would say one more step, right? One more thing to that. The Avodah Zarah itself is human. Sacrifice is human, right? I mean, we found Mayans and Incans that were completely dissociated from the entire Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, that had no connection whatsoever to the human beings on that side of the earth. And they were practicing sacrifice, practicing even human sacrifice. It's part of humanity. This is what human beings do. So the Torah recognizes this not as an act of Avodah Zarah per se. It recognizes the fundamental human nature towards this behavior that found its channeling in idol worship, that the Torah guided towards God. But it doesn't go away. I mean, it is deeply wired into the human species, as is these kinds of things. And like you say, as you bring up chapter 11 in Hilchot Avodah Zarah, that's how Rambam recognizes. There's all of these things, the haircuts that people have, the piercings that people do, the cuttings and so on. It's part of humanity. All human beings across the earth, tattoo themselves in some way or another, pierce themselves in some way or another, shave, get haircuts in some way or another that express some tribal elements. So that's part of being human. So the Torah spoke to you as a human being. You humans like to tie things to yourselves and put, emblems upon yourselves. Do these emblems and do them for me. That's what the tefillin are. So yes. Question number 11. What do you think about online conversion and online tevilah? I think you mean tevilah. It says here tefillah. Oh no, maybe you do mean tefillah. Tefillah? I don't know. Some rabbis carry out the conversion process via Zoom, perform tefillah via Zoom, and even view the mikveh process. So I'm going to apologize. I'm not answering this question because I don't have enough information to answer the question. What parts are online? How is the tefillah conducted? And so on and so forth. It all depends on how it's being done, what's being included. And so unfortunately, I apologize. I don't have enough information to answer this question appropriately. Question number 12. I have a group of Haredi friends, congratulations, who want to learn more about the classical Sephardic tradition. Which books and texts do you recommend I be learning with them? Well, first of all, I don't know why you have to be learning with them, but if you want to, by all means, I would say two things. Number one, you should learn the Moreh Nebuchim. I genuinely believe that a typical Haredi, I'm saying typical because there's Yotzei Min HaKlal Haredim that are not, they're typical Haredi. I would say the typical Haredi off the street will learn Moreh Nebuchim if they learn it appropriately, right? And the book that just recently was published, or the version that was just recently published by my dear friend Rabbi Yochai Makbili, is very good. It's very strong, and the pirushim there are, I think, basically sufficient for a person to read it who's able to understand Hebrew. Which I hope that the Haredim you're talking about can read and understand Hebrew, which is a basic requirement of fearing and trembling before God. You can't really tremble and fear before God if you don't know Hebrew, in my humble opinion, because you can't read Torah in its native language. So there's a tremendous distance with regards to that. I would suggest that they learn Moreh Nebuchim, because the typical Haredi that reads through Moreh Nebuchim will recognize that it goes counter in many, many places to typical Haredi thought. I understand I'm generalizing here. I completely accept that I'm generalizing. I completely accept that there are Haredim Yotzim Min HaKlal that kind of identify, but that's what I would imagine would be the case. For the majority of Haredim, they will read the Moreh Nebuchim. First of all, there are Haredim that hold that one shouldn't read the Moreh Nebuchim. It's just not appropriate. I've even met some Haredim, although they're not the majority, who don't believe that the Rambam wrote the Moreh Nebuchim. But regardless, they will find many things counter to typical Haredi life in the Moreh. And the other Haredim who recognize that it's the Rambam, who did learn the Moreh and so on, will say, okay, we don't hold like the Rambam. But there's no question that what we are calling the classical Sephardi approach, which is a term that we coined because there was no term for it before, and we just spoke it that way to differentiate, it, is heavily based on the Moreh and the philosophy of Harambam. So that's what I would say. Outside of that, let them spend a lot of time in the Chabura. That's what the Chabura is for. Okay. Question number 13. I'm not sure if the Rab followed the Eurovision singing competition. I did not. I never do. I'm an American. I really have absolutely no understanding or interest in Eurovision. I'm sorry to disappoint anybody about that. But of course I heard, this year what was going on. And he writes about, when I saw the video of the Jewish contestant walking across the stage with the Israeli flag, I felt immense pride in my country and awe of the bravery of this person. As well you should. Why would you not feel such things with such great expressions of human courage and bravery and pride of one's identity so boldly expressed? At the same time, when you look at the video in isolation, there is nothing religious or in accordance with halakha about it. I just wanted to ask, how am I or we supposed to process these seemingly paradoxical emotions? I don't find it paradoxical in any way, shape, or form. Why do you find it paradoxical? Does it need to be religious? I suppose I'm asking you, why do you have an assumption that needs to be religious or halachic in order for it to be deeply proud and inspiring that a member of Israel is standing up against the literally the world, right, in that setting, who is clamoring and booing their very being? Why does that come into the realm of religion? It's a question of identity. And this person standing up proud to be part of the nation of Am Yisrael. I mean, in my opinion, if you want to talk about religion, there's nothing more religious than that. This person is Mikadeshem Shamayim, by expressing herself as a member of the ancient people of Am Yisrael, still living and thriving under the brit that they have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, in front of the entire world, literally booing her and clamoring for her disappearance or failure. I mean, that's what it's all about, my friend. Literally, that's what it's all about. Question number 14. what are the most important lesser known books of our Hachamim that I would recommend? Again, with this question, who you mean by our Hachamim? You mean Sfaradi Hachamim? You mean Hachamim Am Yisrael? I don't know who you mean. So it's hard for me to suggest, and I'm not going to, because I don't know whether you mean Sfaradim or you mean the Hachamim of Am Yisrael and so on and so forth. There are many, many, many lesser known books that are very important that people don't pay attention to. And finally, this is the last question, and the question is, where is it? How can we know truth? Whether it is a news article, a scientific idea, or something religious, does the Hacham have a method for us how to investigate and get to the truth? It's a good question. My answer to that question is you need to learn how to think in order to be able to get yourself into a better position to recognize whether something is true or not. And the majority of people don't know how to think, especially today, because today people are just getting so much information thrown at them. They don't know how to think about the information. They only receive the information and they think about the information however it is they're told to think about the information, which is usually some kind of context, micro context that the information is expressed in. So if you're flipping through Instagram or whatever it is that you flip through, or Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and you get something that comes up, how do you think about that thing? Well, I mean, there's a context that you see it in, what I call a micro context, right? That you see it in that on your screen in that particular post or whatever the case may be. And most people just go with what is it they see. They get all up in arms about it. But recognize the difference between taking in some information and thinking about that information. So what one needs to do is think about how one is thinking about whatever it is that a person is thinking about, right? There's a difference. Yeah, most people just think whatever it is that comes up in their brain. But the trick is thinking about how you think and questioning whether your thinking is appropriate. So that's why I say it requires people to learn how to think. In other words, if you want to be able to put yourself in the best position to approximate truth, you need to really spend a great deal of time learning how to think, which is why Harambam, for example, the first book that Harambam wrote when he was 16 years old was a book on logic. Because if you don't have logical, reasoned thought, you're at a loss. There's no way to know what's true and what's not true, to be able to firmly set your grip on reality. You end up becoming one of those people who constantly are swept up in conspiracy theories and things like that. So that's what I would say. Why? Because knowing truth requires verification. And verifying requires a robust system of thinking. And if you don't know how to think, you can't verify. So I will suggest to you, and that's why Harambam also in the Moreh Nebuchim, the first thing that he writes in the Moreh Nebuchim for pages and pages is just because you think does not mean that you think correctly. And it requires a tremendous amount of work and effort to learn to think correctly. So there's a nice book, it's cute that it's called this, but there's a nice book written by Alan Jacobs called How to Think. And then the subtitle is A Guide for the Perplexed. I don't know if he meant, to kind of like nod to Harambam with regards to that, but nonetheless, it's a small book. It's not a difficult read. I highly recommend it as a first step, for just the popular reader. If you're not going to take a course in logic and so on and so forth, just to be able to begin to be conscious of how you think. Read that book. It's called How to Think by Alan Jacobs. Okay, and with that, I thank you all very much for your questions, and I'm grateful that you've asked them. And I hope that my offerings for answer were, at least sufficient. And again, like I say, I apologize for not being able to uh, answer some of them as robustly as maybe you might have wanted because of just the syntax or the nature of the questions. But keep them coming, and hopefully we'll do more. We'll do more of this. And I wish everybody Hatzlacha Rabbah, and I would like to close by wishing Am Yisrael Yeshuot v'Nechamot and Besorot Tovot, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should take us out of this very difficult time into Or Gadol, into Yeshua, into Herut, and into Shalom. Good night.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chacham Dweck, for your time this evening. Everyone is obviously encouraged to keep an eye out for future upcoming Chabura Shirim. And thank you very much and good night.